It is my privilege and joy that we can continue our Bible study about the least of these. And today we have the subtitle, Mercy and Justice, in Psalms and Proverbs. Now we have seen that suffering and disease and all kinds of damages that we have in this earth have a cause. And before we can speak about mercy and justice, we must have clear definition of what is what. So we started and we have seen that the cause of suffering is an inner belief of man that he is a God, and by that inner belief he uses all resources that come from God for himself. That's why he gets sick in certain circumstances. That's why he becomes poor in other circumstances. That's why in all circumstances finally people must die. But some must die young because they have to go into the war. And we have fights in the family, and we destroy nature by that we use all resources for ourselves. Now, to give a definition of the issue of justice or injustice, we need to understand the creation of man. So man was created out of earth, of the dust of the earth. God formed man, and he added to that the breath of life. By both coming together, they gave the soul. Out of the earth, there came out a very complex body with many organs and infinite functions, so to say, an infinite study. And out of the breath, it becomes a very most complex spirit. And this must have a connection to his creator in order to be able to live. Now, to come a little bit closer to this, we must know that the human being has a cockpit. That is, there is a place where all things start. And we know from the physical aspect of all our body, the physical starts in the cortex. And the cortex is in need of electrical impulses by which he is put into action. But the question is, who does it? Who puts it into action? And it is the spirit that puts the body into action by his thoughts, by his decisions. And both of that give the soul. So the soul is just a combination of cortex in the cockpit. Yes, there is the whole body together, and there is the spirit, who must be dependent on God in trust to satisfy his needs, to satisfy the needs that God has put there in order that function should be possible. So, since we are a creature of God, and it was known to Adam and Eve that they are a creature, they knew about their needs. They had the need of love, of justice, of truth, of security, of freedom, of harmony, of joy, and of understanding, and many more. And in order to satisfy those needs, they had to have a personal trust relationship with God. Because God is the source of all this. And they must go and take those things from God through trust. God puts them and puts himself into this position. He's there for all our questions. But God gave us also a body, and the body has also the needs. And he needs first electrical impulses. And those are done by the Spirit when he gives righteousness, when he gives love. Trust is the taking, and the output of the Spirit is what he does with his body. So when I speak, it's the output of my spirit that makes the body to speak through electrical impulses. And it's also God that made the body dependent on chemistry. So I need oxygen, water, food, temperature, and light. And he gave me also source in nature where I have to take that to provide it for my body, but also as God fixed the source where we should eat, because we were not made to eat everything that God created. Today, man is, yes, so disturbed in his mind that he thinks everything is good for food. No. There is a certain type of food that, or a certain type of things that God gave us to eat. And if we are trusting God and take from Him everything, we are dependent on Him, then our decisions that make the electrical impulse and that give and provide to the body his chemistry needs will by no means develop any disease. The body and the spirit would be always healthy. They could not become sick inside this, how God created it, the law. Now, we must understand this in order to understand where suffering comes from, where disease comes from. Because as a physician, I must have an answer to this. And so the cause of suffering is self-deception. That is, I believe an error as a truth. And since I was made to believe the truth, and now I believe an error as truth, how can I ever get rid and understand that what I trust into is wrong? So, to define the error, to define righteousness and unrighteousness, we need to know the law by which God guides His universe. And we take it here just in regard to the Spirit. The Spirit needs love. Every action that we do must come out of love. And so God gave us the law that everybody must trust in order to take this law and then make the action to act out of it. So no spirit has its own energy and means. There is never something that God created that has its own energy and its own means. It's just not possible. God is the only source by which every power and means come from. So some people get confused at this time, at this place, and say, well, then I'm nothing. No. You are a very, very complex being with abilities that go into the infinite. But you just have no power to use these abilities and no means. You have to take those means and that power, and then you can use every faculty, everything that God has made you to use. You see, you have a good airplane, you have a good car, you have a good computer, but without power, they are worth nothing. I mean, they cannot fulfill their task for what they were made. So nothing was made to have its own power and energy and means, and nothing was created for himself. So, if all spirits, and also the spirit of man, was not able to create his own power, how could he only break the law? Where is the only vulnerable place where the law, the everlasting law of God, the fundamental of the law, can be broken? It can only be broken through not longer trust God personally. You see, Lucifer and Adam and Eve stopped trusting God personally, stopped having a trustful relationship with Him because of a self-deception that arose in Lucifer, and then Adam and Eve was tempted to believe it true, that they could be independent. That means they could be God, who does not need to trust anymore. So the greatest issue in the law is that you cannot trust God when you think you don't need to trust, because you live out of yourself. This is the fundamental lie of our life. That's why, in reality, God did not make it possible for any being that has a spirit to not trust. But now Lucifer does not trust anymore, but he trusts to himself and others. That is, now I take God's property as my own base of trust into. It's not anymore person to person, but I take God's means because I think they are mine, but in fact I trust to God's property. He uses God means for himself, while he thinks it comes from him or other creatures for him. So it's an amazing deception. We think we don't need to trust, but we must trust. Then we use our means not anymore to give, but we give in order to receive. It all is for us. And the third thing of deception is that I think I must receive the satisfaction of my needs by what others are doing or not doing. So people believe God has to satisfy their needs. They don't understand that it must be done by themselves. So the only way to break the law is to separate from God, to not trust God anymore. And you can only do that by self-deception. Only self-deception can seduce you to not trust God, to not have a personal relationship with Him. So, coming back, what is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering starts with self-deception. You believe a lie about yourself that is as a truth, and then you keep on to it. Every violation of the law is the result of self-deception. I like the absolutes. Have you seen that? Every violation of the law is the result of self-deception. Every injustice is the result of breaking of the law. And every suffering and misery and disease is the result of injustice. How shall we get away with unrighteousness be removed? You see, God says here in Psalm 82, how long will you judge unjustly and accept the person of the wicked? When is unrighteousness, and how, by what can the unrighteousness be removed? Now we know in Psalm 82 it doesn't speak to normal human being, it speaks to the authorities of the state. That he calls them gods here because they judges. They have to do something godlike. They have to judge and do justly. Not for them, for the state. And they didn't do it. They didn't defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. But that is not spoken to you and me personally. But still, we face unrighteousness in our life, and we must know how to remove it. But we only can know that unrighteousness is the result of breaking the law, and the result of breaking the law is self-deception. So when we want to solve the cause, we must take self-deception away. That's why the Bible speaks of righteousness by faith, because the only way to break the law is through mistrust in God. That's the only way to break the law. There is no other way for a spirit to break the law except here, and if he breaks it here, all other things that he does wrong is just a result of this one thing. Everything will be fine back in the moment that we can trust God, and He becomes everything we have. He becomes the counselor of our lives. He becomes that person to person, that heart to heart relationship. From that is righteousness. And out of that, every action of our life will follow. So, coming back to human, we understand that now man thinks he's a God. He does not know anymore that he needs to trust. He thinks he is independent. So you see, our children, our youth, and even most adults think they live out of themselves. But when injustice happens, they get into trouble. And when they are not connected to God, they must act as well unjustly. That makes a wrong electrical impulse. And then the chain in our body will be shown through disease. Illness, pain is the consequence of I not acting justly. That's very important to understand. But I do not act justly not because I don't want to. It is because others have done me wrong and I must get right. I must satisfy my need for justice and righteousness. No one can dispense of it. But man does not see that now he's bound in trust to animals, to people, to Lucifer. They have none of his needs. There is no justice, no truth, no security, no freedom, no understanding in the land. There is nothing of that there. And then when those people do me wrong, I act wrongly as well because I take from them. I'm in confidence to them. I'm in trust to them. Illness and pain is the consequence because I believe that others have to satisfy my needs. What a terrible deception that is even very hard to explain, that we all get it. So, disease is the result of a wrong electrical impulse. But this wrong electrical impulse comes because of injustice that the one believes was done unto him. Because he thinks he was treated unfairly. And you see, all problems that humans have are unjust. Are injustice. Because if the law, keeping the law is justice, breaking the law is injustice, no matter what other thing comes out of it, it all is injustice if it comes out of the breaking of the law. And out of the I am God, there can never come out any just thing. But we don't get sick when we act unjustly as an aggressor. We only get sick when we act unjustly as the one who goes against the injustice done unto him. So it's always the one that considers himself that he was wronged that becomes sick. And it took a while to figure out why. Why does not the aggressor get the sickness? Why the one to whom was done wrong? So let's look to it. On me wrong was done. To whom was that wrong done? There's two questions or two ideas that I hope we can understand, and the language barrier will not get in between. So I was betrayed. He has betrayed me, has lied to me. He has beat me up. He has abused me. He has done me any injustice of any kind, because all wrong is injustice. Now the main question remains, who was wronged? Now I could give you many, many examples. I take just one very common, because it's in the family. Just this week I had a lady that came to me, and she was in trouble because her daughter, who is about 40 years old, she's about 60 years old, rejects her. Rejection is one of the greatest things that can be done wrong to us, especially when we have done nothing wrong. When we did all our good job and we are rejected, we cannot suffer that. Our wrong nature, our wrong identity cannot suffer rejection. That's why Jesus had to go through this most deepest temptation. He came to his own, and his own rejected him. Rejection by your own might be the greatest temptation that exists. But it shows out what's in the heart. So this mother is rejected by her daughter. Even though she sacrificed so much to her, she gave 3 of her years up just to help her when the child was small. She gave her not only time, she gave her money and gold. She gave her power. She worked for her. Day one, many days. In spite of growing her up and all this. That today, the daughter doesn't want to speak with her. That's an injustice, isn't it? Isn't written in the law you should honor your mother and your father? Now, what the daughter does, it's her business. But what does the mother? Why is the mother hurt? Why is she in trouble? Why does her body show symptoms? Because others do her injustice. And this is not the only one. There are people who are rejected, even they have done nothing wrong. They have been clear and did always was right in their job, in their church, wherever, then they see themselves unjustly treated. Why do they become sick? Why can they not cope with what others are doing them unjustly? So the answer is easy, but not so easily to be put into practice. It is just by what identity do I judge that what was done by the other one? Do I judge it as a God who is spiritually independent, or as a human being that is spiritually dependent? Do I judge it as that anything belongs to me, or do I judge it as nothing belongs to me? Do I judge the situation as I have done all out of myself? From my own, I gave the time, the money, and the work, or from the perspective of a creature that knows whatever I used was God's means, and I used it for God's purpose, so it's all fine with me. I'm sorry for the other one, but I'm sorry for me. Or do I judge it as a God who thinks all it's about me, or all is about the Creator God? So, who was wronged? If I am a God, I was wronged. To whom was that wrong done? It was not only done on me, it was done unto me personally. So when the daughter rejects the mother believes she is rejected personally. If she would know that she's a creature, then she would know that God is rejected, not her. Because she uses all the means of God. And whatever the cause might be in the head of the daughter is, I pray for it, but I, as a mother or a father, whoever was dealt wrongfully, whatever happened, it was not done unto me. I took this lady and I said, how much time did you give from yourself? Well, she said 3 years. I said, how much time of those 3 years were yours? Well, they were out of my lifespan. Yes, how much of your life is your life? You see how deep the deception is in us, that we think we live our lives, that we think we use our means, while all of this is a deception of thinking that I'm a God. I must understand, who am I? I said to her, how much gold did you give her from you? Well, doesn't say the word that all gold is mine. How much of the power that you put into action was yours? Stop eating and breathing. Let's see if you then still can do something out of yourself. So humans are not aware what's the problem. They don't see that what they do is just using the means. But there is a clear thing that we must understand, that Christ spoke in the gospel, in his Sermon on the Mount, and he very clear explained there in chapter 5 from verse 38. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. So, isn't that very plain? Why did Jesus say, don't resist him who does evil to you? Because you see, if you consider the evil done unto you, I mean it's against you personally, then you must do yourself justice. You must justify yourself. You must get out and justify you. But in that moment, you justify yourself. You break the same law as broke the aggressor. You become unjust in the moment that you consider injustice was done to you. So when you give back to that what was done unto you with the same way, what's the difference? Jesus says, how are you different from all others? Because a smile gets a smile, a hit gets a hit. So, if I know who I am rightly, then I know that God will justify me if someone did wrong to me. So I don't need to justify myself. I can let the other cheek as well. I can give also the other thing, the cloak for me. I can go 2 miles if someone forces me a mile, because I don't do anything for myself. And if it was unrighteous to do it, I was forced to. It is not my wrong act, but the other's wrong act that will come up into justice or in the judgment, and God will show who is right and wrong. So see how simple it would be if we just would know who we are. Because when Jesus was in the need, and I like this quote from Peter, 1 Peter chapter 2 from verse 21. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who did not sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. So he shows that there was no reason for Christ to be punished. There was no reason to be beaten. There was no reason to be put on the cross. There was nothing. It was pure injustice. Pure injustice. who when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously. That is how we have to deal with rejection. That is how we have to deal with every wrong that is done unto us, because every wrong that is done unto us is injustice. I don't need to justify myself. I don't need that anyone should be there, that I should justify myself in front of him. God will justify me. He will justify Christ, and he will show him in the great judgment day. And he will justify us all if our trust is in him. But if we believe we are God, then we are the victims of the unrighteousness. Then we have to revile, and even if we keep it in ourselves, we will destroy ourselves. In reality, I'm never the victim. There is one thing we must learn out of this lesson, one thing. Righteousness can only be satisfied with righteousness. Unrighteousness cannot be removed through unrighteousness. If unrighteousness was entered in violence, then if I use violence to remove unrighteousness, I am unrighteous. You see, we are tempted to put away unrighteousness by unrighteousness. Isn't that stupidity? Isn't that something very, very weird? But that's why God invented disease for the victim, not for the aggressor. Because the aggressor can understand he does something wrong. He does unjustly. He does unright. But the one that suffers the wrong, when it goes against it, even though in your heart you protest inside, you do the same wrong because you want to eliminate injustice through injustice. That's never possible. That's why disease is a great eye-opener. It helps us to see that wrong can only be overcome by good. Unrighteousness can only be removed by righteousness. And this will be our study in the next hours, because it's not only about the Psalms that the theme of unrighteousness or grace is there, or mercy. We must go into more deeper study than this, what we have done until now. But we want to learn this one lesson from this lesson today. We want to learn this one thing. Whenever we try to remove unrighteousness through force, our action is unrighteousness. That's why the impulse is false in our brain and the body becomes sick from it. Righteousness can only be overcome. Unrighteousness can only be overcome through righteousness. Unlove can only be overcome through love. Violence can only be overcome through unviolence. It's never the same way. And this lesson is the most hardest for us to understand. But without it, we might never see that something in us is deeply wrong. And it must get out. That's why when our children reject us, whenever we have and we are treated unjustly, we might not justify ourselves, but see if there is something in us that we can change. But never act out of this, but just out of I'm a creature of God. God will justify me. Our lives must be a proof that God is our righteousness. And so we act righteous in spite of the unrighteous acts of others. May God's grace help us to this. Amen.